The Diablo IV beta has come to a close, at least for those of us that ended up pre-ordering the game. The public beta, however, is only in a couple days. But to keep you entertained and get you your Diablo fix, I thought that I would end up having a couple videos that are going to highlight some of the classes in the game in case this is something that you didn't really get to experiment with. So the Barb's gameplay is surprisingly in-depth. For a melee character, it has a very well-rounded playstyle. Later on, you'll be able to jump into battle with your leap attack, but for the most part, spin to win is always going to end up being a fan favorite. This character excels at bleed builds in particular, also has a nice set of attack speed that you can end up just slowly, perpetually building up over time, and essentially ends up being tankier so long as you're outputting damage. The way that you generate energy on the Barb is Fury, which is basically as you deal damage, you'll regenerate your Fury or your mana pool so that you can then end up using all of your skills. The complexity comes in the fact that the Barb ends up equipping 4 different weapons at a time. So you'll end up having a blunt two-handed weapon, a cutting two-handed weapon, and then dual wielding 2 smaller weapons that will end up having either blunt damage or slashing as well. Where the character's complexity comes from is that all of the skills that you end up choosing for your Barb, some of them will end up having benefits based on using a specific weapon. So for example, there might be an ability that causes bleed that will end up doubling the chance of causing bleed if you end up using a two-handed blade instead of dual wielding or using a blunt weapon. Now, by default, the game is going to end up automatically swapping to the most optimal weapon for you. But if you end up having like maybe a legendary weapon that has a good aspect to it that you really want to use, even over using the most optimal weapon for the skill itself, you can always opt out of the automatic swapping and just pick and choose which attacks will end up triggering which weapon on the Barb. This works in tandem with the weapon mastery, where as you end up using a weapon in the game as the Barb, you will become more proficient with that weapon, gaining various stat buffs with it that are just passive damage. Another thing to keep in mind is that there is going to end up being a quest you get at around level 20 per character. And for the sorcerer, it would basically unlock the ability to add an additional passive effect to any of your spells of your choosing. With the Barb, unfortunately, we weren't able to get to the NPC to give us that quest because that NPC was just out of the beta zone, right? So I don't know if the passive ability that we got on the sorcerer is going to be the same on the Barb, but assuming it is, it means that there's going to be a whole other layer of complexity because you'll be able to pick and choose which skill gets which passive. If you like an Unga Bunga character that excels at being right in the middle of battle and taking aggro from your teammates to tank it all yourself, then this is the class for you. I was really pleasantly surprised to see the amount of care and depth thrown into this melee character, and I'm just excited as all hell to see what the end game builds will end up being.